I have an amazing opportunity to interview Jace Mattinson. So he is just, I want to say, one of my favorite interviews so far. He's just so down to earth, but so clever. The fact that he took his opportunity to get from a CPA to structuring a leveraged buyout of a 250 person, 30 store company at 27 years old, come in as the new boss man and having to restructure it and take a 140-year-old company and then have a 9-figure exit on it. Obviously, not all of those 9 figures were his. It was he was a percentage of that, but the mindset, the structure, the things that he's done, and now how that is layering into his new ventures. Man, this is an exciting episode with Jace Mattinson. Hey, Jace, it is awesome to sit down and actually chat with you. And it's an interesting dynamic because we know each other from a mastermind group, and we've had a few little conversations here and there. But this podcast for me is really exciting because I get to ask sometimes the questions that you normally wouldn't have in a typical conversation. So I'd like to do is just kind of take us on a 10-cent version of your history leading up to this. And then how does a CPA turn into a lumber mogul to a private equity, 9-figure exit, and then what you're doing today. So let's just dive in the 10-cent version of Jace from, birth to kind of where you are today.
Yeah, totally. And thanks for having me, Jake. It's good to sit down with you too. Been a big fan of yours for quite some time. So yeah, I was born in Houston, Texas. Didn't spend a lot of time there, but I think the Texan blood is deeply rooted in me. And I came back, but I'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, I was raised mainly in Washington. My dad works in heart surgery. My mom's a nurse practitioner and stuff. So I grew up in kind of a blue collar / medical community in Eastern Washington. Great place to grow up. Played a lot of sports growing up, basketball, baseball. Basketball is kind of the one that I pursued the most, and had a pretty successful career with basketball through high school, and had aspirations to go play in college. But, my dad's 6'4", and I just never quite got to that point. So all the recruiters kept thinking I was going to grow, and it just didn't happen. And I chose to kind of go get a better education, so to speak. Than go play basketball at a community college or a junior college and kind of go that route. So growing up in Washington, I started hustling when I was young. I think part of it was just in the blood, and also my parents just telling me like, hey, we're not going to give you everything. So I started selling snow cones and candy as a kid, and which is ironic with one of the businesses I'm involved in now. But started that when I was real young, and we did it all summer, made pretty good money, figured out how to kind of, understand gross profit and all that. And then I had a paper out in a lawn care business. And, I was rolling what I thought was pretty good as a high school kid with all this different income. And, I was working hard, but I was trying to be as smart as I could with the money. And, one year, and I always joke about this, but I spent $2,000 at Taco Bell my junior year of high school. And that was a little bit of a wake-up call for me that, I didn't need to go eat out, and I didn't need to spend that. My dad was kind of like, what the heck are you doing, dude? But he let me kind of fail in a way that instead of putting that money away, or as much money away as I had before, I blew all that money. And at the end of the year, it's like, dude, look where your money went. I was like, Taco Bell.
Were you, that's an interesting, were you tracking that, or do you have like a credit card? How'd you know you spent $2,000 at Taco Bell?
Yeah, no, I just looked at my bank statements. I mean, I got a bank account pretty young, and I was making good money for a high school kid. You look at like my hourly wage, my paper hours every day, man, every single day, 4:30 to 5, which is people are dependent on you. Like, you can't just like take a day off, when we went on vacation, I had to find a sub, but it was basically like $25 an hour. It took me a day. My dad was real nice and helped me out with that. And didn't ask for much. I think he just, some gas money we gave him for the car and some repairs and all that junk, but he helped us and really just kind of instilled hard work and work ethic. And, hey, you're not going to just, have a free ride with us type thing. And a big sacrifice for him, too, to get up that early. Granted, he was going to go to work right after we got done with that and whatnot. But, there are a lot of days where I think I was pretty good at wanting to get up and get out of bed, but there are days, in the middle of Washington, in the middle of winter, man, it's miserable. It's cold. It's like 20 degrees, snowing, it's icy, like throwing newspapers up on people's porches. Like, so I kept track of all that money coming in and for my lawn care and where it all spent. And my dad would help me like, hey, let's go through your statements. And that's how I found out I spent a couple grand at Taco Bell,
No, the tacos were cheap, man. It was like, I remember
it was
39-cent tacos.
Yeah.
And, maybe it was 39-cent bean burritos and 29-cent tacos, but
it was good times. It was, man. The crazy thing is I still love spending money on tacos, just not quite like that.
I feel you, man, especially in Austin. I mean, there's a lot of good taco places that you can go sling $4 or $5 for a taco.
Yeah, taco's a food group in my house.
So your high school, and you went to kind of dove off there on the taco category of food, but you're heading into college.
Yep. So I go to college and I went to BYU and then took off for a couple of years, served a church mission out in Eastern Europe and Bulgaria. Came back from that. I was pre-med before I left, come back, and I had aspirations still to play basketball. Came back, it's like, all right, basketball's done in terms of pursuing it on the collegiate level. And, I really need to kind of focus on figuring out what I want to do with my life. And at that point I was like, I just want to own a bunch of businesses, not a bunch, but like have a few businesses. Like I get real bored, with just one thing and the monotony of doing certain things. And in my head, that was what I wanted to go do. I remember I had an entrepreneurship professor and I told him that. And he gave me some good advice. He said, you probably should start with one, which I was like, I agree with you. But, I want to know where I'm headed too. And so ended up deciding to major in accounting, one, because it was a very top program at my school. But the other part of it was, my dad always pushed, even though I was pre-med, he pushed getting education in business and partly just to understand a lot of things that are going on in business. And, I felt like accounting, being at the school I was, it was a great place to kind of land and major and go through the business school. And so that's what I did. And still kind of trying to navigate what I wanted to do with my life. Found myself working with a couple guys that were doing self-storage and some commercial real estate. And I got on the accounting side with them, pretty early in, I think I was a sophomore when I started working with them, and really started learning different kind of businesses with them. And, they had that, which I was involved with, but they had a few other businesses, and, I'd get in, hear some of those conversations and whatnot. And that was like phenomenal experience for me. I know sometimes entrepreneurs and just in general, it's like, just go start your own thing. But I think there's some value for some people going and working with an entrepreneur and understanding, how they mitigate risk and how they evaluate risk, especially when you don't have, substantial, like these guys were worth millions. And I was able to kind of get a front row seat in the way they do things. And, they're in their 50s and 60s. And so did that, and then decided that I was going to end up going the Big Four route. And so I did, went with PwC, got my CPA license, and knew that wasn't going to be very long. But my thought was, dude, I've always spent all this time doing this degree. I might as well just go get the stamp at this point and take the test. And that way, if I ever do, have, crap hits the fan, I know I can always probably open up my own CPA shop or buy one, which is very high margin business. So that's what I did. Got my CPA license, and then I left there and got into an outsourced firm, kind of into more operational stuff, which was more interesting to me, better fit kind of my skill set, personality. Did that for a little bit. and then had a client of mine. I was a partner in our Austin office, and had a client of mine who was needing some help. And so, I basically did a little bit of a leverage buyout on the equity. And in hindsight at this point, I wish I would have done a lot more, but going back to like taking risks and how much you can, I basically leveraged my whole net worth at that point to do this. And so, I had one stream of income at that point too. It was in my 20, I guess maybe two with one rental. And so I did it and spent, I guess, almost 6 years there, and had a big, nice 9-figure exit to another company, private equity company, or private equity backed company in the lumber space. So that was exciting, and went through that, and then decided to kind of join forces with one of my college buddies and kind of move onto the private equity side ourselves, looking at small businesses and kind of building out, some long-term platforms, very atraditional private equity, in the sense that we're not, trying to flip these in 5 or 7 years. And then, on top of that, I've diversified, and I just love business. I love real estate. So I continue to buy those types of assets, outside of my private equity endeavors. So that's the gist, man. And I'm live in Austin. I got 3 kids, a beautiful wife, been married for coming up here on 8 years soon. And I got 3 almost 4-year-old, 2-year-old, and a 3-month-old. So we're busy.
Yeah, that is a exciting journey, and I'd love to dive into. You're working in as a CPA, kind of an outsourced firm. You have a client that's, maybe a little bit in trouble or something like that, needs your help some way.
Yep.
Your leverage buyout. So, like, so that's 6 years. Your wife, you've been married 8, so you're married.
Yep.
I'm going to transition, do this. What does that look like? What was that opportunity? Why'd you believe in it? Or was it just naivety of you just, like, let's go do, I want to own businesses. Like, maybe talk me through that mindset when you're thinking and looking about doing that transition from CPA to lumber.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think some of this goes back to my roots, really. Both my grandpa or grandfathers were contractors. One was a big building contractor, and my other was in the plumbing and AC trade until he had an accident. And so I think just being exposed to some of those environments, and then, I realized pretty quickly, like, the reality is, like, I'm not the most smart, book smart kid out there. And so, and I did a little round in Silicon Valley with PwC because I was attracted to tech. Tech, fascinated me, and, what Steve Jobs had done, but got out there quickly and realized, man, there's a lot of companies out here that go for a long time without any profits. And that just fundamentally, I just could not really wrap my brain around that. And so from that experience, I was more, I was attracted to these companies. Going back to, like, this experience I was with working with these real estate guys, like, I was always attracted to these industries just personally that were unsexy, not sexy. And it didn't matter, like, hey, you're probably not going to have the biggest profits in these space. You're not going to get the biggest multiples on these exits, but you're going to get nice, consistent cash flow. And that resonated with me. And so even before I joined forces with this lumber company, some of my other clients and in the spaces they were in were like very unsexy. I mean, I had a reseller of electronics, that big manufacturing facility, and they refurbed all these electronics. I mean, just very unsexy. You go to their warehouse and it's like, dude, these guys, there's no way they're making millions doing this, but sure enough, they were. And so I got really attracted to those types of business, and still am, to these that are profitable, but very unsexy. And part of it's like, I can't remember what book it is. It might even be The Millionaire Mind, but there's a quote in there about an entrepreneur, and he said, "Look, I think it is that book, and he's in the used car parts reselling space. Had a big firm in Dallas, and he said, look, I want to play in markets where I don't need to beat my brains out over profits. And basically what he's saying is, I don't want to have thousands of competitors where we're pricing ourselves to the bottom. And I think a little bit like that too, where I want to have these businesses and be involved in businesses that aren't probably what you're going to read the headlines about, but are very profitable. And this lumber company, this opportunity was very much that. I mean, the company had been around for, since 1881, 140 plus years. And so I figured, hey, this company's been able to weather some of these storms. They're just in some trouble right now. The revenue was there. I figured that with my expertise and partnering with a couple of the guys, I feel like we really could have turned it around. And so I was willing to take the jump and make that bet. Had it not had revenue, like it's a totally different story. But given that there was some of that track record, that they just needed some professional, accounting and some other things to kind of understand what's really going on in the business, and put in some, processes, procedures, and put some, get the right people on the bus, so to speak. And I felt like I could, be pretty successful in doing so. And so that's what led me to make that jump.
So how much of that was things you learned in school? How much was that PwC, things that you experienced just seeing? And I think you had a really clever, insight as far as working within the other entrepreneurs ecosphere, as far as the self-storage guys that you were working at during college, that most people don't understand is there's systems. Even though you're an entrepreneur, you don't have to be the solopreneur the first time out. And so, give me a little bit of some context of what gave you that confidence that you thought, hey, I can come into this and now do it.
Yeah. I mean, some of it is, I think, the training. I mean, not necessarily like, hey, like learning the nuts and the bolts of accounting or whatever. Like a lot of that stuff, in my opinion, is like it's more of a weed out process in a way where, hey, you got to go through this to show that you have capability versus the next guy. And you do learn some stuff along the way. But I think practically, knowledge comes from these experiences, especially in my case that I've had, in all these different environments, and being able to apply that knowledge. And so for me personally, like I think very logically, and I'm very like in my head coming from some of that accounting background, I think, but just as it being, my nature is I'm very like right here, like 2 columns, like, let me put it all on paper. Like, here's the list, like boom, boom, boom. I'm going to execute. Don't get me wrong. Like I still get bit a little bit with shiny object syndrome to some degree, but not as bad as I've seen like various entrepreneurs or others do. And I think some of that's just nature and in what I have, but also some of that's been training. And part of it is like, when I look at like what I'm involved in, I will, do inventory. It's like, okay, this is taking up this much time. This is taking up this much time. This is taking up this much time. I enjoy all those. I really don't have capacity to add something else. Now that changes all the time. And so I take inventory of the things I'm involved with all the time, but I'm not, hey, I thought of this really good idea, let me start go chasing all of a sudden. No, I just put it in a notebook, file it away, and I approach it later if it's something that I really want to pursue, instead of kind of chasing it. And then part of that's just, I think, just my nature, and being, the way I grew up, and like, it's very black and white. I want profit. I don't like companies that like, I can't understand like what's really going on. It's like, Warren Buffett always jokes about this, not jokes, but like he's like, I gotta have somebody I understand. Like it's gotta be black and white pretty much. And I'm very much the same way, and I'm nowhere near as smart as him. So I need to stay like very basic in a lot of ways.
So you do this leverage buyout into this lumber company. Everything was just sunshine and rainbows from there.
I wish.
There on out.
I wish, yeah. Yeah, the first.
Tell me a little bit, like some of those lessons that you learned into that process, or some of your assumptions that were flawed going into it, and a little bit of that journey of becoming a CFO and board member of this 140-year-old plus company.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's funny thinking back this now. The first 2 years, my wife could tell you even better. It was a grind, man. And there was nights when I was like, what the crap did I get myself into? And had I not had myself tied in with equity, I may have said, forget this, I'm going to go do something else. But I persevered, and just kind of giving you a little context, like I nearly gutted house with a majority of the people that were working there at first. I tried to work with a lot of them. And this is like sometimes private equity or just, companies sometimes with executive turnover get bad raps, but I didn't want to do that. But I just realized that from a leadership standpoint, and this is probably one of the biggest lessons I learned in this whole thing, was how to be a better leader and how to recruit, people that want to be led with your leadership style. And so that's basically what happened. I mean, I had to build a whole staff from scratch, processes, procedures, get all that kind of put in place. And then, that was probably a couple year process before, and really probably 3 years before I felt we were really rocking and rolling. But financially, we got to a point where we could start doing acquisitions, on a more aggressive level, and doing somewhat of a roll-up strategy after about a year and a half. And so that's kind of what we pursued. But yeah, in terms of lessons learned, man, just being able to understand, myself, my leadership style, what kind of, people that I work best with in a larger organization. And, sometimes it's very easy to just be like, I'm just gonna do it all myself. But the reality is, like, all of us need people surrounding us, no matter what it is, to kind of accomplish, the greater good. And that's the mindset that I had to really develop, because I'd come from, even though PwC is so massive, it's like I'm just a cog in this massive company that, they don't even know I work here. I mean, it's a funny story real quick. Like, I was working over the winter break one time, and there was this guy, and, he sat over in this corner, cubicle or whatever. And it's like 2 or 3 weeks passed when everyone was supposed to come back for winter break, and no one had seen him. Well, come to find out, like, the guy never showed back up, and nobody noticed for like legitimately noticed and took a lot of payroll for like 3 or 4 weeks, like that stuff just doesn't happen in a company that's, smaller, right? Like, if somebody that's key, like, doesn't show up, like,
Jace, yeah. You'd be like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
How long's it been? I don't know, a month?
Exactly. Like, half the people didn't, I happen to just walk by it every day. So I kind of like, but I also just figured, the guy's on vacation. Like, what do I know? I'm just new here. But those were the big takeaways from a leadership standpoint and understanding, because I just hadn't had a lot of experience in those environments where I was like building teams and like building with a bunch of people and trying to get them unified with, a common goal, and, hitting on all their things that make them feel like, hey, yeah, this is a great place I want to be, and I want to work with him, and I want to work with these other people, because that's important when you're trying to scale companies and businesses.
So was there a little bit of apprehension, or, hey, young kid comes in, he doesn't know what it's like, and so what does the company makeup look like when you step into it? Like, a certain amount of stores, employees, something like that?
Yeah, I think we had like 30 something stores at that time. And by the time we sold, we ended up with 40 something, but employee count was probably 250. And by the end of it was upwards of, 450-ish probably. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like, building out an accounting department, finance, and, credit and all these things, some of the structure was there to some degree. But it wasn't really professionalized, and, things had just always been kind of done the way people had always done them. And in that specific industry, I mean, it's even when I was there, like, there was a lot of stuff that, coming from a little bit of that tech background, that I'm like, dude, this is just archaic. Like, we're spending way too many resources and time on these kinds of things, and like, these things just need to change. And there was a little bit of resistance to that because it was change, but at the end of it, after a lot of those things, I'm not saying that I made all the perfect decisions, but in changing things, but there were times where we got to the end of it, people were like, holy cow, like, this is, and it even turned out in some cases better than I even thought it would in making some of these changes. But it made, there's a lot to do with the culture, and, the culture was just like non-existent almost, and trying to build that and unify, everyone, and feel like everyone had a purpose and it was important. And I mean, there was a lot of uphill battle. And you mentioned, being the young guy, like, that was some that, you have a little bit of imposter syndrome to some of you. I was like 27 years old, it's like, I've never done something like this, but to some degree, people always joke, fake it till you make it. But the reality is, like, I wasn't faking it. I was just doing it until I made it, like, I'm not going to put on a fake. It's like, yeah, I'm going to do this and figure it out. And that I think that attitude served well in trying to get to where we're going. And like I said, I didn't make all the perfect decisions, but it's a learning process too, in doing something like that and then scaling and then going through the process of like, selling a business that big to somebody else. Totally different deal too.
So did you always think that you were going to sell the business as far as the exit, or what were you building when you started out, or did you have an idea?
No, that's a good question. Like the first couple of years, like just survival, like get the head above water, get to a point where we can start doing some interesting things and kind of get that flywheel going. I mean, this company, like, is essentially cash flow negative. And it's very asset intensive. Profits are, typically a little bit lower compared to some other industries from an EBITDA perspective. And so there's just not a lot of, and if you're trying to reinvest, and the nice thing is when you go buy these things, there's a lot of assets to leverage when you go buy, in terms of a roll up. And so it took a little bit of time to get that kind of rolling. And I don't think that we ever thought as a board and as management like team that selling was much of a on the table until we kind of started hitting critical mass. And then it was like, holy cow, valuations are going nuts for, where we've gotten to a point with EBITDA. Let's explore this. And then we did, and it was like, yeah, these valuations are legit. Hired an investment bank, and it's like, man, this is crazy. And all of us were like, all right, well, I mean, granted, I was the only one that was going to continue to do things. Everybody else was in their 60s, so they were like, hey, this will be it. Hang it up. We'll be done. Been a career. And in my case, it was like, sweet. Like this was great. It gave me, a great 5-6 year run. And now I can go do something else, take this experience and go leverage to do something else that's interesting to me.
So your business strategy, obviously the first couple years, getting your head above water, getting some of these legacy non-culture, systems, out of the way and layering in tech. But you said something there. You started doing acquisitions, acquiring other businesses, and the businesses traded at low EBITDA, numbers, but they had a lot of assets. So dive into that a little bit. Like, were you using the assets to leverage to do the acquisitions of these new companies, or what was the nuance of the growth that you were able to bolt on?
Yeah, totally. It's an interesting concept because in that space, particularly, like we would like to own the real estate. We owned about 75% of our real estate, which is a very interesting. I mean, it goes back to Ray Kroc and McDonald's and whatnot. But we felt that there was a nice happy medium with some of these, and you never want to own a piece of real estate you don't think is going to be more valuable down the road, but to some degree, like owner operated and owning occupied real estate is some of the most valuable in the world. And so that was what we tried to do with these acquisitions. So when we negotiate, the deal, it was, hey, we're going to buy everything, real estate, the inventory, which is a huge asset, and then the, rolling stock or trucks, forklifts, et cetera. And, it'd be a little bit of furniture, fixtures, but nothing crazy. And so when you're going to present that to the bank loves seeing all these assets on paper. And in a lot of cases, we would negotiate the deal as a whole. And granted, like this is before we're getting any diligence done, right? Like we're putting something down in LOI saying, hey, we think that we can probably do this, looking at it, backing into the cap rate. What does this look like on paper? And we would negotiate the deal. In a lot of cases, like we ended up buying the assets of the business for essentially what the real estate was. Or in one case, we even had a huge bargain purchase. And so, there's not a lot of cash outlay to then go buy the real estate and the profits from the business. If they had, in a couple cases, they weren't super profitable, but in that space particularly, like it's just not known for one-offs to pay a lot of blue sky. And so, in most cases, we never had to pay probably more than 1 year's worth. And we get a ton of assets to then be able to leverage to continue to grow. And that was huge. I mean, I don't even know, probably 3 or 4 recaps on the real estate. So we had some more cash, which some people may say, oh, that guy's an idiot. He just ran a bull market. It's so risky. But to some degree, I didn't feel like there was any other option, especially because that market and that industry had been consolidating like pretty quickly over the last, 10 or so years.
Yeah, that is such a key thing that I think, yeah, call it luck, call it, as far as the run of timing of Texas and the growth of population, but whatever, no one else was doing it,
Yeah.
and it was, I mean, what a exciting, journey. So you've gone there, you hire investment bank to kind of look, validate, are these valuations? Was it a quick exit? Did it, take some process, some time? Did you have things you need to clean up? And I asked that because I've had some other people that, they had some PE firms or other people like come in and be like, hey, I want to buy you and do that. And then they come in, they're like, oh my gosh, you're a disaster. Like, you guys suck. Like, we can't invest in you. But because of your CPA background, did you have a better system put in place that made that acquisition or that exit smoother?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. In fact, I think that was probably key in how everything kind of transpired is, I always go at the thought with these businesses, and some of this comes from my post PwC days before I went in with this company, that you always want to build everything that you can sell it no matter what. So if somebody comes in, think they're the buyer, what are they going to want? And they may want to change some stuff, but you don't want to have yourself positioned such that somebody's not going to do a deal over the way that things are done. And that may never happen. But back to like, when we first started, there was never a sale on that. We'd never, hey, yeah, this is the plan. Like 5 years, we're selling this thing. We got a private equity owner. Like, this is what we have to do. And so I always came in with that mindset of what we were putting into place, that one, it's scalable, and two, it's sellable. And so we could scale with it as we grew. I mean, with what we put in place, like, we could add, double the store count if we wanted to. And obviously, like, we got to a point where it was, very sellable, and we didn't have to change a lot. And I think that's important for a business, no matter any size. We're looking at these businesses now, my new gig, and like, they're small too. And like, that's the first thing we do. We buy these things, they're broken in a lot of cases. We've got to put in professional processes, procedures, etc. If those businesses already had that, they're going to trade at a higher multiple because it's not as much work, it's not as much risk. We go through the financials. It's like, there's always things, there's always holes, like, and all sorts of things. And so I think that's a extremely important point you bring up, and just being, from a mindset standpoint, when you have a business, whether you own one or invest in one, make sure that it's scalable and sellable, with processes, procedures, and everything that comes with that.
Yeah, I took a note of that exact thing that you said. I was going to say that's going to be like maybe the title of this, scalable and sellable,
Yep.
And the systems that you're putting in place. So that's very key. I want to, before we dive into what you're doing now, think of the lumber company. You had a fantastic, 9-figure exit to a private equity group.
It's not all in my pocket though. Make sure everybody knows that.
No, I mean, it could be, what currency we talking about?
Yeah, right.
Zimbabwe,
Zimbabwe dollars and maybe there, yeah.
Yeah. But what was one of your favorite failures, or couple of failures that you highlighted that segment of your career?
Yeah, I mean, I don't love the word like complete failure, right? To me, failure only happens when you stop trying. And so I wouldn't say there's anything that, like, typically in my mind that we failed at. Now, what could we have done a lot better? I think back to the deals we lost and how we lost them, right? Like, remember there's one out in the beautiful part of Texas, and like, we had done a whole bunch of due diligence, done all sorts of stuff, I mean, attorney, like everything. And we show up and we're expecting to sign papers, and the seller says, "Oh, we're not selling." We're like, wait, what? Like, we took a private plane out there, like did all this, like we're, because it's, it's not easily accessible, and the deal didn't happen. And going back, it's like, we did not understand what that seller wanted on that exit, and what our proposal was. And part of this is, it gets complicated, right? Like, what we didn't know until later in that meeting, and this was just back to, learning to do better due diligence, is there was an ex-wife that had children, and they were part of, the profits of this business. They were on payroll, and they, although they didn't have a vote, they had significant influence. And so, we could have done a lot better job at probably structuring that to accomplish what those people were wanting. And what, granted, I don't really know. Sometimes those get complicated, but the lesson in learning there is, hey, you're probably going to lose some deals, and part of it could be you're not willing to pay the price at somebody else is, or you're not in a position to pay the price. But I don't want to lose a deal on a go forward basis because I misunderstood what was driving that deal. And that was a big takeaway from that one, and one other one really, but that one specifically, and making it, because I planned to have a career to some degree in doing these kinds of things, whether it be real estate or business. And it's not just a deal, it's also like a customer, right? Like, what is driving a customer to come and buy something from you? And what is going to get that customer to, repeatedly buy from you, and putting those kinds of things to thought as you go throughout, whatever you're involved with.
Yeah, I think that has a lot of insights into what you're doing now. And I think exactly what you hit on, the psychology of what is it, the drivers of the decision. Why are they selling? What is their motivation? Is it money? Is it legacy? Is it, like you said, family dynamics in there with stepkids that can have, difficult to, peel back the layers of the onion when you're doing due diligence, then it's not on a org chart or something like that. But, and very, very so critical is, I say this even in the commercial real estate world, like, why is someone selling? It's this great, fantastic deal that's just minting money, a net lease deal, that you don't have to do a whole lot of work. Like, but why are they selling? And understanding that backstory is so, I'd say not completely critical, but as far as if you're looking to highlight, some people are not as price sensitive. Or more, or they're price sensitive, but you can negotiate the terms on the duration. You can do seller carrybacks or other things like that, because they just, in their head, they wanted $10 million, because it was 8 figures. And then it'd be like, okay, I can pay you $10 million, $1 a year for the next 10 million years. Like,
totally.
Like, let's do that. And they're like, great, I sold my business for $10 million. So you took some valuable lessons. You've exited. I'm assuming you have non-competes in the lumber, or kind of retail space. What are you doing now? And, those skills and lessons you've learned, and how are they being applied to version, I don't know if it's 2.0 or 3.0, whatever version you are right now. 3.0, because you're in your 30s, I guess.
Yeah. I'm in my early 30s still, but yeah. So joined up with a college buddy. He's a super smart guy, probably one of the smartest that I've ever met. Way smarter than I am in terms of looking at things like that. And he went to Wall Street. I went to Harvard Business School, and then started a fund. And I joined him, and so now we are buying, small businesses. I think EBITDA 1 to 5 million, and then we'll continue to bolt on acquisitions and in similar type of roll-up strategy that I had with Higginbotham, or that I had with the lumber company. And so that's the play now. It's super interesting. We've gone after a couple different industries, particularly in the services space. And we'll expand those as much as we can on a national level. The one unique thing about us too is it's permanent capital. So our investors we're not expecting to turn these things and have a big exit. I don't think this would ever work with these small businesses to do that. I'm not saying that we couldn't sell some of them in 5 to 7 years, but in just terms of the way we're thinking about them, you make decisions differently when you have the desire and the intent of holding, these assets for a much longer period of time and just taking the cash flow. And one thing traditional private equity typically has, and it's not really an issue, but it's an interesting phenomenon that buy a business, buy an asset, get in there. Sometimes you change over the management team and you hold it for 4 or 5 years. It's grown, and then you go to sell it. And when you sell it, that's when like a lot of the risk is off the table at that point. You've owned the business, you've gone through, a few years of things, like maybe an economic cycle even. And now it's like, all right, I'm going to sell this off. And of course, everybody, loves the story of a big sale, and traditional private equity is just built that way because that's kind of how the industry works. But, we're taking a very different approach that way. And, we'll cut dividend checks to our investors down the road off the cash flow of these businesses. And so that's what I'm up to now. And, we'll probably start raising fund 2, sometime later this year, which will be exciting. And our model's been proven out so far pretty well. One, that we can find these types of businesses, and 2, that we can buy them at attractive prices. It's very different in some cases. Like, we're buying these businesses, and there's not a lot of assets. Totally different than what I had with buying lumber businesses and whatnot. So it'll be interesting. It's a fun ride, and I'm excited with it. And it'll be interesting to see kind of the dynamics as we move into these different industries and have exposure to different industries, from a personal standpoint and investment standpoint.
So I'd like to dive into it a little bit. I mean, service businesses, like you said, totally different, very asset light, so to speak. You're out there servicing, lawns and, whatever else, contract kind of basis. How does that change your ability to finance them? And then is it maybe just because of your fund vehicle is the question? And maybe we'll start with that question. Then I have a couple others I'd like to dive into.
Yeah, it does bring some unique challenges with the financing. You bring up lawn maintenance, like that's one of our platforms, for example. And like that one we did as an all cash deal, partly because it was small enough, but it was also harder to go get bank financing. And that one's probably one of the ones that's most asset heavy. Another happens to have a real estate play with it. And we're buying up the real estate as well in these childcare centers. But, those kinds of things are different for each kind of platform. And it is something that we have to take into consideration, because obviously, if we can place a certain amount of debt on a business, we can increase those returns. And so typically, especially with these businesses that are this small, we have to find, a bank that will do cash flow lending in some cases, or just be able to structure a really unique deal, and sometimes we have in sellers roll equity too. And so that helps, right? Like, we're bringing in equity checks, sellers rolling some, and then the bank will come in and participate as that final partner in getting the deal done and across the table. And then we've got mechanisms in for our sellers to, with some options on both sides if things don't go well on either side type thing, and time periods and whatnot that makes sense from a legal perspective. But it is a different game, each platform, each industry. But I think back to the you just got to find the bank and find the people that are willing to kind of believe in your vision and are willing to take the risk with you. And so far we've been successful, other than the lawn maintenance one, which we didn't try super hard on the bank side, just knowing that it was such a small deal that we didn't really need it. But
so is there some kind of underlying thesis that you're looking for in these types of businesses, and why you're specifically targeting service-based businesses?
Yeah, I mean, the targeting thing with service-based is one. I think that they can usually be bought at good multiples, and multiples that aren't going to scare us. Because once again, we're looking at cash yield. That's the most important thing. So we're not trying to increase value go from a 5x to a 10x, although that would be great, but that's not the play here, where we're trying to build up that EBITDA to have an exit on the multiple. We do get them valued every year and whatnot, but that's more for internal purposes more than it is, hey, we're going to go take this to market. So the other thing is in the services space, just in general, it's a fairly fragmented space. Just in general, I mean, you look at all these different industries, like who doesn't have massive market share? It's like, well, you use a lot of service space because a lot of it's localized. And so that's another attractive thing, that one, we can bring some professionalism to these spaces and kind of merge markets and get some synergies and some economies of scale. And once again, getting back to like Scalable and Sellable, that these may become more attractive. And there are some large players. I'm not saying there's not in these spaces, there are, but you look at their market share and it's like you might have less than 5% in some cases. So it's a place that we can go play and be competitive.
So how are you finding these deals? And I'm assuming it just, the little that I know about the space, that 1 to 5 EBITDA, that you're looking, maybe depending on the business, is between maybe a 1 to 3 or 2 to 4 multiple on their whatever their EBITDA is. That's making some assumptions that they know what their EBITDA is. At least
yeah. It's always debatable. Right? Even at closing, it's always debatable.
We've just been tracking books. My QuickBooks says this. Like, I don't even really know what it is. And, because you're on the lower end of the spectrum of sophisticated businesses or not sophisticated people that have just kind of grown some of their revenues. So
totally.
How are you finding those businesses that are attractive? And then, like you said, it's the human psychology elements, is like people have whacked out values sometimes and what they think, well, it's worth $10 million. You'd be like, no, it's worth 1 on a good day,
Yeah. Everyone always thinks their business is worth more than it really is, which is, more power to them, but there's just a reality of what somebody will pay. And, we're very different investors, and then we're looking at cash yield, and that's what we're selling to our investors who are putting into our fund. And that's what we want. So at the end of the day, when we're underwriting and putting together the models, like we're looking at that cash yield is kind of the number one driver from the financial perspective of what we're willing to pay and what we kind of want to do with the business as it grows. And so the way we get most of these is brokers. I mean, there are some small business brokers, and the reason that those have been most successful is because the seller has already kind of raised their hand and said, hey, look, I'm interested in selling, a hire broker. And there's brokers all over the country. There's some big players in the smaller business spaces that broker some businesses as well. But that's the main. On top of that, we do try to look down in certain markets after we've acquired something and we want to scale. And hey, does it make sense to go after another competitor? And would they ever entertain selling? And sometimes those conversations land on deaf ears. And in some cases, one thing that's phenomenal in my mind about the marketplace right now is you have this huge transformation of wealth and just skills, and just, this baby boomer generation is exiting in a lot of ways and moving on to those sunset years of retirement. And they're selling their assets, whether it's real estate or whether it's businesses. And so if you can find, back to the psychology and driving, like you can find a business or an asset that, these baby boomers are interested in unloading, it's ripe for the picking, and there's a lot of millennials like my age that, especially in these services and like unsexy business, they don't want to go do it. They'd rather go work for the Facebooks and the Googles, but when they go make any money with those Facebooks and Googles, guess what? They're hiring all these companies that we own to do, maintenance, lumber case. We were selling lumber and building houses for all sorts of people. I mean, I can tell you some crazy stories, like, building a house for this guy's like, how did that guy make his money? His first thing he does is go spend it on a new house, big old ranch, that kind of thing. So that's where I play and think in terms of like, hey, millennials don't want to go do this. I think there's an opportunity, and there's enough of the millennials, but just on a broad market, they're just not interested in these businesses that their parents have ran or started, and they're ready to move it on. And so it's a great time for us to go buy it, keep it rolling, bring in our own professional management, and go from there.
Yeah, I think that's, very, very astute and 100%. I don't know. I saw something like 60% of businesses for sale don't sell at all. They just end up closing it down.
It's
And
nuts, isn't it?
yeah, which is interesting. And had I learned a few of these things a few years ago, there was a paving company. So they made pavers, bricks, pavers,
Yeah.
all those things like that. And it was a guy that was like in his 80s and his kids had no interest in it. And he literally just
Closed it up.
the business.
It's
And
crazy,
like
right?
he had like these big giant machines that like would produce bricks and pavers and all these other things. And it was just like, that's it. Closed it up, gone.
Yeah.
And you're just like,
Yeah.
wow, what would have you sold that for? A nickel?
Yeah.
I mean, it's very, so, I'd like to, maybe give some insights, some tactical things. Maybe if people didn't go to, get an accounting degree and go work for one of the big fours and happen to have one of their clients, in trouble to do a leverage buyout, what are the things that other people may be able to do to get into buying some businesses? And then secondarily to that, I'd like to dive in is like, what, are deals that maybe people could help, share to you or that you're looking for?
Yeah, I think the first part, and I think this is something that I feel like I've done, and earlier in my life, I think you're probably in the same boat. A lot of people that I know that are kind of earlier, younger in the game, is find what you are really good at and find what interests you, because they always, I don't know if it's Jim Rohn or one of them, but like if they say if you love what you do, you feel like you never work a day in your life, and I really do have passion for what I do. I love it. I love customers. I love the team that we surround ourselves with. And I really do feel like business is inherently good. I mean, it can definitely be bad, but I do feel like business is good. It can create a lot of happiness. It can create a lot of wealth. It can create a lot of jobs that bring fulfillment to people. It can allow people to grow with their skills. And so that's the kind of stuff I want to be involved with from a growth standpoint. And so figuring out that, what you're really good at and what things are going to be interesting to you, the earlier you can nail that and then just get on the rocket ship and pursuing that, whether it's a specific industry or specific skill set within something or whatever, I think the better off you are. On top of that, follow up on your second, we're, like I said, 1 million to 5 million EBITDA. Service-based businesses mainly, but we'll take a look at anything really that seems interesting, and if we can make a platform out of it or can be added to one of our others, we'd love to look. We've got landscape, apartment maintenance and services, childcare, and a pool service kind of platform under the umbrella right now. But obviously looking wherever nationwide. We're not completely region agnostic. Right now we are more on the west, and then Texas and a couple other southern states, but that's kind of the build out now that we've got.
So I could continue, on forever. Like I love this stuff. Like I totally geek out on this. What are some things that helped you along the way? Books or other, things that you gained, knowledge base to allow you, the comfort level. And I bring this up because it was like when I started my company, a boutique kind of private equity real estate company, my wife will ask, and I remember it pretty vividly. I was laying in bed and I was like, I'm going to start this private equity company. And she's like, what's that? And I was like, I just read it in a book. Like I'm just a couple of chapters ahead of where I need to be. Like, so like, that's it. Like, so I feel like books have been hugely, helpful to me. But like, what are some things that you've gained, or maybe it's all just natural ability, or people or mentors, or maybe give some helps guidance for some people, little breadcrumbs that have helped you out?
Yeah, no, books are huge. Podcasts in this day and age, I think are huge as well. To some degree, I look at podcasts and books really, but podcasts are different in the sense that you get to hear the voice. Some readers read their own books, but you have a dialogue like you and I have. I listen to podcasts all the time. I feel like I'm getting mentored by some of these people that I may not even have. Before I was into abundance, like I was listening to things that in this mastermind that basically I was like, man, I feel like I'm getting mentored by this person that like, that's where I want to be. The other thing is surrounding yourself with people who are on that same path, who think alike, but also think differently, because that'll sharpen the way you think. And sometimes those are difficult places to get into in terms of like, you may have to shell out some cash, or you may need to hustle, or like get the lunches with those people. I don't think that anybody who's been successful feels like they've done it all on their own. And I still feel like I'm still kind of on the journey, but I lean on people all the time. One, from changing my mindset. One thing I haven't really shared is like, I love my parents, but man, my dad is the most risk adverse person you probably ever met. He's done extremely well in his career, and I grew up in that environment. So I had to kind of get rid of like that muscle that had never been moved from a risk standpoint. And not like people use the term risk, and I look at risk as like, hey, what could go wrong, or what would happen. But being able to reframe that, like, okay, I'm just going to protect most of the downside on this. And like, sure, could anything go to zero? Maybe, like, it's possible. But understanding how to take some of those calculated risks, because I think to some degree, like, the biggest risk you can ever take is trying to just completely play it safe with everything, and that's not just investments, but just in life in general. And so being able to understand your risk tolerance and profile and working on that, because I've never met somebody that is, accumulated a lot of wealth, or, however you want to define success, whether it's, massive amounts of time with their family, or whatever you want to, goes on crazy trips or whatever. I've never met somebody who's like, oh man, I just did this, like, being conservative with everything. Like, it took some risks, and so figuring that out, I think, is super important. And then, getting yourself in those circles that are people are going to build you up and challenge the way you think. There, some of the investments that I've made at this point, I would have never probably done had it not been being around some people who think about passive income the way they think about passive income. And by passive income, meaning, hey, I'm going to write a check for this, and I'm going to get a return on this, and I'm going to track this return as it relates to the cash flow. I think it's very easy for a lot of people. Hey, I'm just going to put a check into something, and we'll check it in a few years. Maybe I'll get a K1, or I'll look at the balance every so often. But tracking those kinds of things, like, it creates results. And not everyone loves to do that, but I think it's super effective. And I've never met somebody that I want to be like that hasn't done things like that.
Man, there's so many insights into that. So let's take it as, what are some podcasts that you found that are super helpful to you, and then maybe a book or a couple books that you've you mentioned Millionaire Mind. That's it's been a lot of years since I've read that, but podcasts that you're vibing with or were super helpful, and then books.
I have my own, Jake. I'm just kidding.
What, you're like 350 episodes in or something?
Yeah,
like that?
I'm not. We've recorded that many. I think we've only released 200 and something. But yeah, we interview millionaires. So we net worth millionaires, those that are have hit that mark, how they did it, and we take a really deep dive into their portfolio and their story, which is super interesting. And that honestly has been a phenomenal experience for myself. But I love listening to podcasts that, yours is a great one. Just, those that you can get in an interview style, like, Joe Rogan, for example, is like the number one guy, right? And like, he brings some interesting guests on it. If you can find podcasts business wise, and I have, like, the few that I go to, from the money standpoint, like the Money Guy show, sometimes I'll listen to every now and again if there's an interesting episode. I listen to How We Built This every now and again from a business standpoint. There's a book out there called Buy Then Build. It concentrates on buying a businesses and then building them and scaling them. From a leadership standpoint, there's a book called Leading Change that I really like. And that one, really gets into the details of like what happens, when you take over something that's already been doing, certain things for a long time. And these are just, more applicable to myself. There's some great ones out there on goal setting too. Atomic Habits is one of my favorites. There's I do read some of the major private equity guys like Schwartzman's biography and stuff. And like, I have no desire to get to that level of what Schwartzman's built or anything, but just understanding the mindset of like how he built Blackstone and decisions that were made and like the insights into like the way he thinks about those kinds of things. Like, I think biographies are a great place to go with leaders like that. And, you may never resonate with like the way that they're approaching things, but understanding the way they think, I think can really, serve a lot of value for you as the way you approach your life. And it'll challenge the way you think too. I mean, every time I read one of those books, I'm like, okay, I may not agree with this, but like, that's really making me think differently about this. There's Sons of Omaha with the Koch brothers is another interesting one about, building massive, type businesses and how they think about that and managing all the family dynamics, which gets back into like learning some of that psychology and stuff. So those are my main ones.
Well, I'd like to wrap this up. Where can people find you? And, they got this $1 to $5 million EBITDA deal, or do you have, through your podcast, through your social medias, whatever. This is the ask to the people in the audience out there.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much everywhere. I mean, I don't post a ton on social media, but I'm on Facebook, Instagram. Podcast is Millionaires Unveiled. You can, email me, or text me or whatever. Like I'm pretty open. I'm happy to help, and I'm pretty accessible. And I read my own emails still. I'm not to that point yet, so I read all my own emails and I respond to all my own emails right now. Maybe down the road that won't be the case. I don't know that I'll ever, but I take pride in that. And so if anybody's interested, you can just email me. It's just first and last name at Gmail, and you're going to get a response from me.
Awesome, Jace. I appreciate this. And I was like, the social media stuff is actually super interesting because I like the way that you profile your kids as far as in some of their they're like trip journeys. Like, and I don't know if it's a month snapshot or a week.
It is. Yeah, it is now. So that all started, I was influenced a little bit by the book called 18 Summers. Mm-hmm. And one, just creating a little bit. I'm a terrible like journaler in terms of like getting in. I know some people are really good and some that I've just not ever been able to sit down and just completely like write and journal with my thoughts and stuff. And so what I found is really easy and consistent, something I can do. I always use the phrase, make sure you can do something consistently consistent. And that is that with my kids. I profile every single thing, in a month. We take pictures of what they go do, and I make it very intentional what I do with them. Put it on Instagram as a story. I take that story down as a movie and I send it to an email. And when they turn 18, I'm going to say, I love you. Here's what we've done for the last 18 years. And that'll be kind of a gift that they don't know they're getting. That'll kind of depict their life. With my first daughter, I was super ambitious and did it every week. And then I realized with 3 kids, like, there's no way you get the first kid, you get so many pictures of every day. My third kid is like, shoot, I look at the other mom, I'm like, man, were you in our family this month? I felt bad. Getting like the short end of the stick a little bit.
I 100%, I got 3 kids. I know exactly, our little one is 6 months old. And I was just kind of like, I kind of forgot to take pictures of you at all. First one I got like 1 million pictures of. So
totally.
I get you. I understand the consistency, and same thing, the journaling. I know that people have, figured out some of that stuff. But I appreciate you. This has been exciting. And, obviously we'll have a lot of that stuff, the contents in the show notes. And Jace, appreciate you. Thank you. Have a great, fantastic afternoon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jake. Appreciate it.